Hello everyone, I'm Chris Savage with the Academy Model Aeronautics, and I'm here today with AMA President Rich Hanson and AMA's Interim Executive Director, Chad Budreau. Chad and Rich both have very extensive backgrounds with government relations, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the most recent FAA reauthorization. And to be honest, I can't think of two better people to speak about this topic. So Chad, the new FAA reauthorization bill was recently signed into law earlier this month. Tell me a little bit about what this means for our membership, those guys that are flying today.
So, good question. While the bill has been signed into law, there's a transition period. And there's a section in the bill called Section 380 where it discusses that transition period. And we've already had a seat at the table with the FAA. We've been engaged with congressional leadership, and they've reassured us this transition period essentially means things are status quo for the immediate future. Continue following AMA rules, follow your club rules, the arrangements you have with nearby airports, continue flying as you always have. And during that transition period, we're working with the FAA, we're working with Congress to provide a long-term solution, and we're making some good progress with that.
So ahead of this, we had petitioned our membership to go out and say, hey, tell lawmakers in your area to vote no. And the bill got signed. So did our call to action work? Was our membership's voice heard? Yes. Good grief, yes. So with the bill, at the 11th hour, they started working on the bill behind some closed doors. And when it came out, we immediately went to Capitol Hill and said, hey, we have some concerns here. And the message back to us was, well, the bill's baked. It's done. There's really no more wiggle room to discuss. So that's when we asked our members to contact Congress. And we knew it was not likely we'd be able to stop the bill, but what we needed is we needed to make some noise. And we needed to energize our members to open up some doors that were previously closed. And they did that. And I'll share a story and then I'll turn over to Rich. Is the timing of this was a little bit of a challenge because this is happening during the Kavanaugh hearings. And for those who follow the media, that was a very big national debate. And as we walked the halls of Congress, there were people on both sides. There was a lot of noise and distractions going on in Capitol Hill at the moment. And the hallways were just lined with people making their voices heard on the Kavanaugh issue. And yet, I cannot thank our members enough because despite that big national debate, our members' message was heard loud and clear. It cut through all that noise, and it got legislators to come to us and say, hey, we hear your members' message. We hear your concerns. And in some cases, it's almost a plead. Please tell your members to stop. So because of that, yes, we were not able to stop the bill, but it opened up the door to shape it in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I first of all would like to thank the membership. I mean, I've been involved with this since 2008. I mean, we've been working down this path for 10 years. And it's gone in a lot of different directions and has fits and stops and restarts. But we've gradually made progress over the years. And to some extent, you could say this new law sets us back a little bit, which perhaps is true only in a few small areas. But by and large, it's been a success of the process. But more importantly, it's been our members and the members' response to the needs of the AMA that has really pulled us through that. I can remember back in 2012, before we got the special rule for model aircraft passed, we did a call to action in 2011 and had tens of thousands of letters written to Congress. And just as Chad mentioned, they came to us and said, we've got the message. And that resulted in the special rule for model aircraft being passed in 2012. And although we've stepped away from that a little bit today, that really was laid the groundwork for where we're at today. So if there's any message to the members that I would pass on now, one is a great big thank you.
Yes.
And two is it did work. It set the tone. And although the bill was really kind of baked behind closed doors and we didn't have a real good chance to influence the final outcome on some key areas, what did happen is the message got out there that there are concerns that there's areas of this bill that's going to impact AMA members, and we need a way of fixing that. And the bill actually allows for it. There is some language in the bill that gives FAA the latitude to make exceptions in some areas of the criteria such as the 400-foot area,
Right.
that will allow us to continue our operations the way we are today. So, like I said, if nothing else, I need the members to understand that it did work, and we can't thank you enough for being there for us.
Agreed.
So you touched on a topic there that I think a lot of our members are concerned about right now, and that is some language that talks about a 400-foot AGL cap on altitude. So can you talk a little bit more about that and help our members understand exactly what that means and what the future might look like?
Sure. So I'll kickstart that. And you know, there's a lot in the bill that's good, and perhaps that's for a future discussion of where we see a lot of benefits and benefits that we championed in the bill that made it in. But the 400-foot cap was one of the non-starters for us. As a matter of fact, that was probably one of the cornerstones of why we felt like we needed to further refine this bill, or we couldn't just accept it at face value. And I'm very pleased to say, because, again, of our members' actions and helping us open up some doors that are previously closed, it has made the message very clear, not only to Congress, but also to the FAA, that a hard 400-foot cap would be a detrimental blow to our hobby. And we have already had face-to-face conversations with the FAA. We're creating a team to help codify some of AMA's rules to allow for 400-foot exemptions or our operations to continue to be in place. We're just starting those conversations, so of course we'll keep our members updated as those progress, but things are looking very, very promising. And I can tell you in the immediate future, you continue flying over 400 feet, and I think in the long term, I feel very confident that that will be in place as well.
Fantastic. So what is AMA doing right now? So we just talked a little bit about what the future might look like, and that, you know what, we don't have a lot of concerns for the future, specifically when it comes to some of these problematic pieces. What's AMA doing right now to try to preserve that future?
Well, I'll tackle that one a little bit. As Chad mentioned, we've already had our first sit-down with the FAA, actually before the bill is actually signed by the President. We had a face-to-face meeting back in D.C. with probably more than a dozen key FAA staffers that work with unmanned aircraft issues. And in that meeting, it was made abundantly clear that the FAA has no desire or intention to detrimentally impact the hobby, which goes to the 400-foot issue and a couple of other issues. And the bill does give them that latitude to make some adjustments for members of community-based organizations like AMA. So what the FAA wanted to do in that meeting was create what they're calling a Tiger team, made up of a combination of both AMA members, which Tyler Dobbs will be taking that lead for AMA, and the FAA people to actually put together this team to work on an implementation plan to figure out how we're going to get from A to Z, because they do have to put in place the procedures to comply with the new law. And that's why we have this transition period, is to allow for those implementations to go through. But the key part of that is that what their driving intention here is to keep the hobby in place and intact pretty much the way it exists today. So the biggest thing AMA is going to be doing over the next several months is working with that Tiger team and working on that implementation plan.
And that's where some of the benefits of the bill, and there are quite a few, but Congress tasks the FAA to recognize community-based organizations like the AMA, and it gives us a seat at the table to help shape future regulations, such as the 400-foot issue, and for us to have a more permanent voice in DC, and to champion how we see the hobby in the future. So it's an exciting time, and to echo Rich's point again, the FAA recognizes the value in our hobby. They recognize that we're often the cradle of aviation. A lot of our members become the next generation of pilots and aviators and engineers. We have a lot of AMA members who work in the FAA. So,
absolutely.
They recognize the value of keeping our hobby preserved and allow it to continue to grow.
So talk just briefly about this concept of a community-based organization. What is that about, and why is it so important that AMA is now recognized as a community-based organization? Because I understand that's a topic that has been discussed for several years now.
Well, the idea of a concept of a community-based organization came out of the original work we did with the FAA back in 2008, and looking at what AMA has been for over 80 years, which, to put a word for it, it's a community-based organization, but it means that it's a community of participants that are all interacting with one another in order to put together a program. And this program being the aero modeling community and the way we fly model airplanes. And that has grown and evolved over decades of time. So it really means that you've got a membership base and an organization that work cooperatively and interactively. And community-based organization is just a term that kind of spurred out of that, but it's taken on a little bit of a life of its own because it was part of the special rule for model aircraft. And the challenge we've had since 2012 was to get recognition as the leading, or at least a community-based organization, if not the leading community-based organization for model aircraft in this country. And the new bill actually does that. It actually mandates the FAA to put together a process for recognizing community-based organizations. I mean, just to tell you another story, we actually submitted an application, if you will, a formal application and request for FAA to recognize AMA as a CBO back in 2013.
I would say it's before 14 probably.
Yeah, it was before the interpretive rule. And we actually pushed that across the table and asked that the FAA to recognize us. And that was the first time the FAA kind of says, well, wait a minute, we don't have that authority, or we don't have a process by which we can do that. So we've been working from then for, that'll be at least 5 years, on getting formal recognition as a community-based organization, which we now will have.
Yes, so if I had to highlight a couple bullet points to add on to that, one is it gets us a seat at the table in DC, a more formalized seat at the table. And it recognizes us as a stakeholder who should be shaping future regulations. And also, woven in the bill, it talks a little bit about the need to maybe not treat all recreational operators one and the same. And there's even one section towards the end of our section, which is now section 349. And Congress tasks the FAA and community-based organizations to find out how to develop rules not only for those within a community-based organization, but those, and it describes it as outside the programming and membership of a community-based organization, maybe more of that casual recreational community. You know, they may have a different mindset and fly differently, and may not be as passionate about the hobby, or may not fly, they may fly different aircraft. And so a one-size-fits-all approach to regulating the recreational community may not make sense. And this carves out that path to really help define rules that make sense depending on the risk and the type of operation you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, I think it speaks to the huge accomplishment in that this is something we've been trying to accomplish since 2013, and sort of behind the scenes, aside from the news that members have read around legislation, this effort has been happening even to get us that seat at the table, and to be there now is a huge accomplishment, and it sounds like a great benefit for us.
Agreed.
So does any of this have any impact on pilot registration for AMA members? Of course, a year or two ago we talked a lot about registration. How does this impact that?
You know, I've received that question quite a bit, and I can tell you it doesn't impact registration as it stands today. Essentially what it does, in December of 2016, the National Defense Bill mandated all recreational operators comply with registration. This bill essentially codifies that into an aviation bill. So we are still required to register. It doesn't mean we have to register every individual aircraft. We don't have to register every year. The same rules apply, which is you register once every 3 years for $5 through the FAA, and that one number can be used on all your aircraft, so you don't have to register multiple times. And again, with us having a seat at the table in a more formalized process, assuming AMA is recognized as a CBO, you know, there could be opportunities to continue to refine that and shape that. But as of today, registration remains in place as it did before the bill was signed into law.
Yeah, the one thing you might keep in mind is when the registration regulation was passed or put in place by the FAA, it was put in place as an interim rule, an interim final rule, which means that it was enacted immediately, immediately took effect, but then it also created a call for public comments. And then they have to take those comments, adjudicate them, and then come up with what they call a final rule. And they haven't done that yet. The FAA actually hasn't published its final rule for registration. So there is still the chance that there will be a few minor tweaks to what will happen with registration down the line when the FAA publishes the final rule. But we don't think that's going to dramatically change. We still believe that recreational UAS operators will be required to register one time, one registration for all of their aircraft, and do that, what is every 3 years?
Correct.
So that will probably stay in place. But how you display the number, where you display it, little things like that may change. So we're kind of waiting for that shoe to fall before we finalize registration. But other than that, I believe registration is probably here to stay.
Well, I'll be honest, I have actually learned a lot in this conversation myself today, and I hope that our viewers have as well. You know, for me, I think the primary takeaway for me is that we are now, instead of being sort of an outsider to the FAA and the regulation process, we're now at the table, and we are an integral part of that process. And to me, that feels like a very positive thing.
Agreed, 100% agreed. And this is where I'd like to see perhaps some of this conversation continue, perhaps in future videos, where we start tackling individual topics that are within the bill on 400 feet, or some of the other new opportunities within the bill, or some of the challenges that lie ahead of us. But we now have a much more active role. And in some cases, Congress mandates that community-based organizations are brought to the table to help shape this. So it's an exciting time. It's kind of a new era for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, going back 10 years ago when I first started down this path, you know, I described to our members and to other modelers that my personal belief that long-term, in years to come, we'll still be enjoying model aviation pretty much the same way we do today. We knew that this, because of the advent of unmanned aircraft and this new airspace environment, we were probably going to have to dot a few more I's and cross a few more T's. But the way we fly model aviation, and more importantly, the way we enjoy model aviation, will continue. And it will continue for my generation, my kids' generations, and my grandkids' generations. And this bill does show where we're going to have to dot those I's, but most of those I's are going to be dotted by AMA. We're going to take care of that at the headquarters level, administrative level. There'll be a few more I's and T's that have to be crossed by the members, but we're going to try and make sure that that impact is minimal. But if there's anything takeaways from this is continue to enjoy the hobby. There's nothing more fun than flying model airplanes, and don't let the regulations and the minutia of getting from point A to point B get in the way of having that fun.
Agreed. I almost don't want to add to that, because before we were in this era for the past 3-4 years of this big question mark of where's the future, and now we have a bill and we see the roadmap, and there's still a lot of opportunity to shape it and change it, but there's a lot of good stuff in there, and I'm confident. You know, I have 2 kids, and one enjoys flying models, and I'm not going to discourage that, because I really believe she'll continue to enjoy it. Her kids will be able to enjoy it, and it's going to be it's here to stay.
Well, it's hard to end on any better message than that, and I thank both of you so much for your time in talking with all of us today. Certainly, as things evolve, we'll keep our membership updated through our website at modelaircraft.org/gov, and of course on social media, AMA Air, things of that nature, all of our media channels. And in the meantime, if people have, questions, concerns, what should they do?
Continue following our website, modelaircraft.org/gov, and as you mentioned, social media, Model Aviation. It's over the next few months and years, especially as we move from 336 to Section 349 and into new regulations, we'll do our best to keep our members updated.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you found this information to be beneficial, and keep watching for more exciting updates.